My parents excluded me from Christmas at my sister's command. You're not welcome. So I changed the locks, froze their bank accounts, and left them stunned while they celebrated without me. A cold piece of revenge served on Christmas. They say blood is thicker than water, but for me, it felt like blood was just a really expensive bill I kept paying. My family didn't just cut me off from Christmas. They tried to cut me down, twisting the knife with words like selfish and toxic. What they didn't realize was that when they slammed that door in my face, they were actually setting me free. My name is Rachel, and for 34 years, I genuinely believed being the good daughter meant one thing: always saying yes. Yes to paying bills, yes to covering rent, yes to being the absolute last resort when everyone else had given up. I poured my heart, my savings, and my relentless work into them, always believing that one day, they'd finally see my worth. But then came that late-night call, a demand for a staggering $120,000, and words from my own parents that cut deeper than any knife. That was the exact moment I saw the truth. Love in my family came with a price tag, and I was about to find out what happens when you finally stop paying. What would you do if the people you loved most pushed you out of Christmas and labeled you selfish? This story isn't just about what happened. It's about what I did next. It all started around 11 o'clock one night. My phone buzzed, vibrating on the nightstand just as I was pulling back the covers, ready to collapse after a brutal day. Emily, my younger sister. I almost let it ring, but I knew her. She'd just keep calling until I gave in. I swiped, bringing the phone to my ear, already feeling the exhaustion in my bones. Hey, Em, it's late. I've got work in the morning. Her voice exploded at me, a torrent of frantic excitement, words tumbling over each other like she'd been holding them in all day. Rachel, thank God you answered. I have the most amazing news. This is going to change everything for all of us. I sat up on the edge of my bed, pressing a palm to my forehead. Emily, whatever it is, can we please wait until tomorrow? No, no, no. You need to hear this right now. I've figured it all out. I've been working on this idea for weeks, and it's brilliant. We're going to be rich. Her enthusiasm might have swayed someone else, but after a decade in financial consulting in downtown Chicago, I'd seen hundreds of brilliant ideas crash and burn in months. My stomach tightened with a familiar unease. What are you talking about? She launched into it, sounding like she was pitching to a panel of venture capitalists. A subscription service, people pay a monthly fee, get discounted local products delivered to their door. I'm going to partner with small businesses around town so everyone wins. Customers save money, businesses get exposure, and I take a cut. I could hear her pacing on the hardwood floors, that familiar creak in the hallway of my apartment, the one I'd let her and Daniel, her husband, live in rent-free for years. Emily, I said carefully, that sounds like every subscription box service already out there. The market is flooded. But mine's different, she insisted. People want to support local. Nobody's doing it the way I plan to. I leaned back against the headboard, staring at my ceiling. The logistics alone would be a nightmare. Coordinating dozens of suppliers, handling returns, dealing with complaints. I'd seen seasoned teams with real capital crumble under less pressure. Why are you calling me about this at 11 at night? I finally asked. A pause. Then a sharp inhale. Well, the thing is, I need some startup capital to get things going. There it was. I braced myself. How much is a little bit? Just $120,000, she said, as casually as if asking for $20. I nearly choked. What did you just say? $120,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but think about it as an investment. When this takes off, you'll get it back and more. I swung my legs off the bed, my voice rising as I started pacing. Emily, why on earth would I hand you $120,000 for a business idea with a 5% chance of surviving the first year? Because you have money, she snapped, her tone suddenly sharp. You own a house. You own that apartment. You make good money at your fancy job. It's nothing for you. Her words stung. Yes, I had worked my ass off. I'd saved, invested smart, built a comfortable life. But nothing about $120,000 was small. That was years of savings, a chunk of my retirement. The kind of money you don't gamble on a gut feeling. Listen to me, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I've been in business development for a decade. I know how these things end. Most of them crash within 6 months. If you want experience, start smaller. Use your own savings or ask mom and dad. Her breathing grew uneven. I thought you would support me. I thought you wanted to see me succeed. I am supporting you, I shot back, by keeping you from making a huge mistake. A long silence. I could almost picture her, clutching the phone, Daniel probably asking in the background what was wrong. Finally, she said flatly, "Fine. I guess I was wrong about you." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the dark screen. My chest tightened with a mix of frustration and profound sadness. Emily had always been dramatic, but this felt different. I plugged in my phone and crawled into bed, telling myself she'd cool off. She always did. In a few days, she'd thank me for saving her from a disaster. But lying there in the dark, I couldn't shake the unease curling in my stomach. The next morning, my phone lit up before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. Mom. Her number. Unusual. She rarely called before noon. I answered with a tentative hello, already sensing the impending storm. Rachel Morgan. Her voice was sharp, like she was scolding 12-year-old me again. "I need to talk to you right now." My stomach clenched. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" she snapped. "Is that your sister called me in tears last night because you refused to help her with something simple?" I almost spilled coffee on my kitchen counter. "Simple, Mom?" She asked me for $120,000. That is not a small favor. A pause. Then her tone hardened even more. "For someone in your position, that is nothing. You have your own house. You own that apartment. You make good money at your job. Your sister is trying to better herself and support her family, and you slam the door in her face." I set my mug down a little too hard, the ceramic clinking against the countertop. "Mom, do you even know what her idea is?" "She wants to start a subscription box service. The market is oversaturated and most of those businesses fail within months. I'd be throwing the money away." "So what if it fails?" she said, her voice chillingly cold. "At least Emily would learn and gain experience. Isn't that worth supporting your family?" I had to take a deep breath before I spoke again. "Are you suggesting I hand over more than $100,000 just so she can learn from failure?" "I am suggesting you should support your family instead of being selfish with your money." "Selfish? Me? I'd paid for Emily's wedding when they couldn't afford it. I'd taken the family to Hawaii 2 years ago. Covered Mom's dental surgery when she needed it. Helped Dad when his truck broke down. "Mom," I said through gritted teeth, "I have been supporting this family for years. That apartment alone has cost me more than $100,000 in lost rent. I pay my bills, I work 60-hour weeks, and I still step in whenever you or Dad need help. How can you call me selfish?" Her voice turned icy. "You know what your problem is, Rachel? You don't understand what family means. Family is supposed to help each other, not make excuses." I felt my chest burn with a mix of raw anger and disbelief. "So, helping for years didn't count because I finally drew a line at throwing away my life savings? Maybe someday," she said with crushing finality, "you'll understand what you lost by turning your back on us." And then she hung up. I stood there, phone still in my hand, staring at the empty screen. My heart pounded in my ears. In one night, I had gone from the dependable daughter who always came through to the villain who refused to care about family. I tried to shake it off, told myself Mom was just emotional, siding with Emily because she was the baby of the family. But as the hours passed, the weight only grew heavier. Emily had Daniel. She had Mom and Dad firmly in her corner. And I was left standing alone. Later that afternoon at my desk, preparing for a client meeting, I pulled up the calculator on my laptop. I needed to see the numbers in black and white to remind myself I wasn't crazy. For years of rent at $2,200 a month came to over $105,000. Add the wedding, the trip to Hawaii, Mom's medical bills, Dad's truck repairs. The total made my stomach turn. I had poured so much into them, and not once had I asked for anything in return. And still, I was the selfish one. That night, I microwaved leftover pasta, sat alone at my dining table, and tried to clear my head. I thought about calling Emily again, trying to find some middle ground, but the memory of her angry voice stopped me cold. I thought about calling Dad, but I knew he would just take Mom's side. The silence of my condo pressed in around me. As I rinsed my plate and slid it into the dishwasher, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. My face looked tired, my eyes dim. "You're not wrong," I whispered to myself. "You're not crazy." Still, I couldn't escape the feeling that the ground under my feet was shifting, that something much bigger than a family argument was starting to unravel. I tried to distract myself with paperwork for the Anderson and White consulting project, the one Mr. Thompson had warned me had to close before the year ended. I highlighted numbers, flipped through client reports, but the words blurred. My mind kept circling back to Mom's voice, calling me selfish. When I finally went to bed, exhaustion pulled at me, but sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's furious expression, heard Mom's sharp tone, felt the sting of their rejection. And in the quiet of my bedroom, city lights blinking through the blinds, I realized something I had never allowed myself to think before. For years, I had been the safety net, the one who bailed them out, the dependable older sister. But maybe that role was over. Maybe I was about to find out what it really meant to be on the outside. The next morning, I forced myself to get dressed in a navy suit and head downtown. Chicago's streets were already coated with frost, commuters bundled in heavy coats, sidewalks shimmering with patches of ice. I gripped my coffee like a lifeline and told myself to focus on work. By the time I reached the 23rd floor of Anderson and White, the buzz of the office filled my ears, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the hum of voices in meetings behind glass walls. For a moment, it almost felt normal, like my family drama belonged to another world. Monica, my coworker and closest friend, stopped by my desk with her mug of tea. She leaned against the cubicle wall, studying me with sharp eyes. "You look like you barely slept." I shrugged, powering on my computer. "My sister called me last night with a new scheme. Then Mom called this morning. It was not pleasant." She tilted her head. "Let me guess. They want money." I gave a humorless laugh. $120,000 for a subscription box idea that will never get off the ground. Monica whistled under her breath. "That is bold." I rubbed my temple, lowering my voice. "The worst part is Mom called me selfish for refusing, after everything I've done for them." Monica shook her head. "Rachel, you cannot keep letting them treat you like an ATM. You have carried them long enough." I opened my inbox, trying to focus on the flood of emails, but her words clung to me. I wanted to believe her, but blood has a way of twisting your judgment. At 10, Mr. Thompson called me into his office. He sat behind his massive desk, the skyline stretching out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. His gray suit looked sharper than usual, and the tension in his shoulders was impossible to miss. "Rachel, we need you to push hard on the Markham account," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "This contract has to be finalized before year-end, or we are looking at major losses. I need your best work right now." I nodded, though my stomach clenched. "Of course, I'll handle it." He leaned back, watching me carefully. "You've always delivered. But I need you laser-focused. No distractions." The word stung because I knew I was already distracted. I carried the folder back to my desk and spread out the spreadsheets, trying to drown myself in numbers. By lunch, I had given up on concentration. Monica dragged me to the cafe downstairs where we found a corner booth away from the crowd. She stirred her tea while I picked at my salad. "You need boundaries," she said quietly. "They will keep taking until you stop giving." I pushed my fork aside. "I know, but it's not easy. Every time Mom calls, I feel 12 again, like I'm being scolded. And Emily, she knows exactly which buttons to push." Monica's eyes softened. "They call you selfish, but that is the furthest thing from the truth. You have sacrificed more than anyone. Stop punishing yourself for finally saying no." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that refusing to hand over my savings didn't make me heartless. But guilt had a way of creeping in, whispering that maybe I had abandoned them when they needed me most. Back at my desk, I tried again to focus. I studied projections, highlighted key figures, drafted notes for the client meeting. Yet, every time my phone buzzed with a new message, I jumped. I expected it to be Emily, unleashing another round of anger, or Mom pressing harder. Sure enough, at 4 in the afternoon, my screen lit up with a text from Emily. "If you won't help, then you are no longer my sister." I stared at the words until they blurred. My throat tightened, and I set the phone face down on my desk. Monica glanced over and saw my expression, but I only shook my head. When the office finally emptied and the city lights flickered on outside, I packed my bag and left. The cold air slapped my cheeks as I walked toward the parking garage. My breath came out in white clouds, and with each step, I felt heavier. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, looking out over the street below. Families were decorating their porches with Christmas lights, kids running up and down the sidewalks, laughter echoing in the cold night. I pressed my hand to the glass and felt like I was watching a world I no longer belonged to. I thought about calling Emily again, just to try one more time to reason with her, but the image of her text stopped me. No longer my sister. I turned away from the window and sat on the couch, the glass of wine untouched on the coffee table. The silence pressed in around me, heavy and sharp. For the first time, I wondered if Monica was right. If maybe the only way forward was to accept that the family I had fought so hard to support had already pushed me out. The thought settled deep inside me, and I knew it wasn't going away. That weekend, I got in my car and drove the 2 hours to Springfield, hoping that maybe if I spoke to my parents face to face, things would calm down. The highway was lined with bare trees, the sky a heavy gray, and I gripped the steering wheel as if holding on to a last sliver of hope. When I pulled up to my parents' modest ranch house, the driveway was already crowded. Emily's car sat crooked near the garage, and Daniel's old sedan was parked half on the lawn. My chest tightened as I walked up the steps and rang the bell. Mom opened the door, her eyes tired, but firm. "Rachel, I didn't expect you." I forced a smile. "I just want to talk, please." She let me in, though her body language was stiff. The house smelled of coffee and cinnamon, the way it always did in December. I stepped into the living room and saw Dad in his recliner, the television muted, his arms crossed. Emily sat on the couch, scrolling on her phone, her jaw tight. Daniel hovered near her like a shadow. Emily didn't even look at me. She called out in a cold voice, "I told you not to come here." I swallowed hard. "Emily, I'm not here to fight. I just want to understand what is going on." She snapped her head up, her eyes blazing. "What's going on is that you turned your back on me when I needed you most." I kept my voice steady. "You asked me for $120,000. That is not a small request. I have already supported you in this family for years." She stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. "I don't consider you my sister anymore." The words sliced through me, sharper than I expected. I turned toward Dad, hoping for some kind of balance, but he shook his head. "You make good money, Rachel, and you act like we're asking for the moon. But what you don't understand is family is about sacrifice, not keeping score." My throat tightened. Sacrifice? I have been sacrificing for years. Do you realize how much money I have poured into this family? That apartment in Oak Park has been rent-free for 4 years. That is more than $100,000 gone. I paid for the wedding. I paid for the vacation. I paid for Mom's surgery. And now, because I won't drain my savings for a doomed business idea, I'm the bad guy. Dad's face hardened. "It's not about the money. It's about your attitude. You think you're better than us because you live in the city and have some fancy job." Mom touched my arm gently, though her voice carried the same sting. "We love you, Rachel, but you have become cold. Emily needs us, and as her sister, you should be there for her." I stepped back, pulling away from her hand. "Cold? You think setting boundaries makes me cold? I've been there for her every time she failed. Every time she ran out of money. Every time she wanted me to fix something. Where has she been for me?" Emily's voice rose, high and sharp. "You never needed me. You've always had everything." I stared at her, unable to believe the twisted logic. Everything? I worked my way through college. I took on internships nobody wanted. I saved and scrimped and worked 60-hour weeks to buy that apartment. That wasn't handed to me. Daniel finally spoke, his voice softer than hers. "We just wanted a chance. We thought you'd understand." I turned on him. A chance is one thing. Demanding more than $100,000 with no plan is another. You're married adults. You should not be living off me forever. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. Dad finally reached for the remote, unmuted the television, and said without looking at me, "Maybe you should leave." My mouth went dry. Just like that. No attempt to reconcile, no acknowledgement of what I had done for them. I looked at Mom one last time, searching her face for even a flicker of doubt, but she only sighed and glanced away. I walked to the door, my footsteps heavy on the worn carpet. The December air hit me as I stepped outside, sharp and bitter. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys. Driving back to Chicago, I kept replaying the words in my head, "Asterisk, I don't consider you my sister anymore. You think you're better than us. You've become cold." Asterisk. By the time the city skyline appeared in the distance, my eyes burned from holding back tears. I pulled into my garage, shut off the engine, and sat in the dark car for a long while. I realized that no matter how hard I had tried to carry them, my family had already decided I didn't belong. A week before Christmas, my phone rang again. Mom's name on the screen. For a split second, I thought maybe she was ready to soften. I picked up with a cautious, "Hello." Her voice was clipped, almost rehearsed. "Rachel, I need to tell you something about Christmas this year." Relief rushed through me. "Oh, good. I was wondering what time you wanted me to come over. I already have the gifts wrapped." There was a pause. Then she said flatly, "That's just it. You're not invited." The words slammed into me. "Not invited? What do you mean?" "Emily made it very clear," Mom replied. She says she cannot stand to see you after what you did to her. Your father and I agreed. It will be better for everyone if you don't come. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my pulse pounding. You're choosing her over me? We're not choosing sides, she said sharply. You made your choice when you refused to help your sister. This is the consequence. Maybe when you spend Christmas alone, you'll finally understand what family means. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the twinkle of Christmas lights I had put up the weekend before, the wrapped boxes piled neatly under my tree. A cashmere coat for Mom, a bottle of aged bourbon for Dad, new cookware for Emily and Daniel. I stared at them until my vision blurred. For years, I had been the one who made sure Christmas happened. I booked flights, bought gifts, paid for the expensive dinners when Dad's card was declined, and smiled through every snide comment. And now, I was being cut out entirely. I tried calling Emily, straight to voicemail. I left one message, then another. Please, let's just talk. Let's work this out. Silence. I called a third time. Still nothing. By evening, I grabbed my coat and drove to Oak Park. The streets glowed with holiday lights, houses lined with decorations. When I reached my own apartment building, the one Emily and Daniel had been occupying for free, I knocked hard on the door. Emily, it's me. We need to talk. Her voice came muffled through the door. Go away. Please, just open the door. Let's not do this. There was a pause, then sharper words. There's nothing to work out. You made your decision when you turned your back on me. I don't consider you my sister anymore. My throat tightened. Emily, you're being ridiculous. Just open the door. No. Leave me alone. Don't come back. I stood there for 10 minutes, knocking, pleading, my breath clouding in the cold hallway. Not once did she budge. Finally, I turned and walked away, the sound of my heels echoing down the corridor. Back home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat staring at the Christmas tree. The wrapped gifts mocked me from beneath its branches. I thought of the money, the years of sacrifice, 4 years of free rent worth more than $100,000. The wedding I paid for, the trip to Hawaii, Mom's surgery, Dad's truck repairs. Every time they needed me, I had stepped in without hesitation. And now, they had slammed the door in my face. The longer I sat, the more the hurt hardened into anger. I realized I was done begging for a place at a table I had already paid for 10 times over. The next morning, I loaded all the gifts into my car and drove to the mall. The clerks raised their brows as I returned bag after bag, scanning tags, counting bills. Nearly $900 back in my account. Money I would no longer waste on people who saw me as disposable. I walked out into the crisp December air, my arms empty, my resolve stronger. If they wanted to exclude me, fine. But I was not going to keep being their safety net while they treated me like dirt. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, the quiet hum of the heater filling the room. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine a Christmas without them. The image felt strange, almost foreign, but also freeing. I began to sketch a plan in the margins of the page, my pen pressing hard into the paper. It wasn't just about surviving the holiday alone. It was about finally drawing a line that couldn't be crossed again. The following afternoon, I met Claire Johnson for coffee at a quiet cafe near the courthouse. We had been friends since college, and now she worked as a lawyer specializing in estate planning. She greeted me with a warm hug, then sat across from me, brushing snowflakes off her coat. You sounded serious on the phone, she said, leaning in. What's going on? I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl of cream dissolve. My family has pushed me out of Christmas. Emily demanded $120,000 for some ridiculous business idea. When I said no, Mom and Dad sided with her. Now they've shut me out completely. Claire's eyes narrowed. That explains the edge in your voice. I nodded. It isn't just about Christmas. They've been living in my Oak Park apartment rent-free for 4 years. That's more than $100,000 in lost rent. I've covered their wedding, vacations, even medical bills. And somehow, I'm the selfish one. Claire set down her mug. Rachel, have you ever formally looked at the financial ties between you and them? I shook my head. It was always informal. I let them move in. I put Mom on one of my credit cards for emergencies. I covered their mortgage payment a couple of times when they were behind. That could be a problem, she said gently. If you keep those accounts open, they can continue draining you whether you like it or not. Her words sank in. I thought of Dad's card being declined years ago and how I had quietly added Mom as an authorized user to mine. I thought of the utility bills and mortgage payments I had allowed to auto-debit from my account just to keep them afloat. So, what are you saying? I asked. I'm saying you have every right to freeze those accounts, Claire answered. Cut off access, close the card, stop the payments. If they want independence, let them have it. I hesitated, staring down at my hands. Doing that would change everything. It would mean no more safety net, no more chance of reconciliation. Claire leaned closer. They've already made their choice, Rachel. You have to protect yourself. I felt a lump in my throat, but I nodded. I'll do it. We spent the next hour going over details. She explained how to contact the bank, what documentation I would need, and how quickly the changes could take effect. I scribbled notes in the margins of my planner, each step feeling heavier, but also strangely liberating. When we parted ways, she squeezed my arm. You've been more than generous. It's time they learn what it's like to stand on their own. Driving back to my condo, I kept replaying her words. For so long, I had believed keeping the peace meant keeping the money flowing. Now I realized it only kept me trapped. That evening, I sat at my desk with my laptop open, the glow of the Christmas tree behind me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I typed the first email to my bank, requesting that all authorized users be removed from my accounts. I asked for the credit cards tied to Mom and Emily to be closed immediately. I instructed the mortgage auto-pay to be canceled. When I hit send, a weight lifted from my chest. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from release. I poured myself a glass of wine and leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of my condo wash over me. The decision was final. There would be no going back. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was Monica checking in from work. How are you holding up? I typed back quickly. Better. I finally took Claire's advice. No more open accounts. Good for you, she replied. About time. I set the phone aside and closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of peace. Outside, the snow began to fall heavier, coating the city in white. The world seemed quiet, suspended, as if giving me space to breathe. I stood and walked to the window, watching the flakes drift under the street lights. My reflection looked back at me tired, but steadier. You did the right thing, I whispered to myself. And deep down, I believed it. Christmas Eve arrived quietly in Chicago. I woke late that morning, sunlight filtering weakly through the blinds. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the rush of last-minute errands or the pressure to pack gifts into my car. The silence was unfamiliar, almost hollow, but it was also strangely comforting. I made myself coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the blank space beneath my tree where the gifts had been. The city felt different that day. Outside, families bustled down the sidewalks with shopping bags, kids laughing in thick scarves, couples hurrying home with last-minute groceries. I watched them from my window, a small ache tugging at me. This should have been the day I was helping Mom in the kitchen, setting the table with the red linens she loved, or sneaking cookies. Before dinner while Dad pretended not to see. But that door had been shut. By the afternoon, the ache softened. I ordered lasagna and garlic bread from a small Italian restaurant down the block. When the delivery arrived, the scent filled my condo, warm and rich. I set the table for one with a cloth napkin and a glass of wine, almost as if I were reminding myself that I still deserved a good meal, even if it was just me. After dinner, I settled on the couch, the lights of the Christmas tree twinkling softly. I scrolled through my phone, half expecting some kind of message from Mom or Dad, but there was nothing. Instead, my feed filled with photos. Emily smiling in front of my parents' tree. Daniel with an arm draped around her. Mom beaming beside them. Dad holding a plate of ham. The caption under Emily's post made my blood run hot. Spending Christmas with the people who really matter. Sometimes you have to cut toxic people out to find peace. Toxic, that was what she had reduced me to. Not the sister who had paid for her wedding. Not the daughter who had kept the lights on when Dad's hours were cut. Not the woman who had given them a free home for 4 years. I was toxic. I set the phone down, my chest tight, and reached for my laptop. I opened my email and reread the confirmation from the bank. The accounts had been closed. The credit cards canceled. The mortgage auto-pay disabled. For the first time, their survival no longer depended on me. I sipped my wine and let that truth sink in. They could toast each other in Springfield and laugh at my absence, but the safety net was gone. The line had been drawn. Later, with snow falling outside, I pulled on a blanket and streamed an old movie I used to watch in college. The quiet felt heavier as the night deepened, but it wasn't unbearable. It was a different kind of quiet, one without the tension of pretending. No walking on eggshells, no plastered smiles at the table, just me, my home, and a decision that was finally mine. When the movie ended, I video called Laura, my old roommate from Northwestern, who now lived in California. Her face lit up the screen, framed by palm trees and sunshine, even in December. We talked for an hour, catching up about her kids, her job, and the chaos of holiday travel. She knew a little of my family drama. And when I admitted that I was spending Christmas alone, she smiled softly. Rachel, sometimes being alone is healthier than being surrounded by people who hurt you. After we hung up, I felt lighter, as if someone had handed me permission to stop feeling guilty. I carried my wine to the bedroom and changed into pajamas. Midnight passed quietly, the city streets blanketed in snow. For the first time in years, I fell asleep on Christmas Eve without the dread of arguments simmering under the surface. On Christmas morning, I woke late, sunlight reflecting off the snow outside my window. The quiet was startling, but not unwelcome. I made pancakes, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. My phone buzzed, and for a brief second, I thought it might be Emily, but when I flipped it over, it was only a notification from the news. I ate slowly, savoring the calm. After breakfast, I bundled up and went for a walk. The neighborhood was still, most houses wrapped in holiday stillness. A few children played in the snow, their laughter echoing. I felt like an outsider, peeking into another world, yet also free from its demands. Back home, I curled on the couch with my laptop. I opened the folder where I had been keeping notes on the Markham project, but instead of working, I clicked back into my emails with the bank. Reading the confirmations again was oddly satisfying. The ties had been severed. Hours later, as the sun set over the city and the sky turned pink against the snow, I poured another glass of wine. The thought of my family gathered around the table in Springfield flickered in my mind, but it no longer twisted like a knife. I imagined Dad fumbling with his card. Mom realizing she no longer had access to my account. Emily bragging, completely unaware of what was coming. I leaned back in my chair and let the glow of the Christmas tree wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. On Christmas morning, the world outside was hushed and blanketed in white. I pulled back the curtains and watched flakes drift slowly past the window, the city wrapped in silence. For the first time in years, there was no rush to get dressed, no car packed with gifts, no anxious glance at the clock to make sure I arrived on time for family dinner. I made myself a proper breakfast, bacon sizzling in the pan, coffee steaming in my mug. I ate at my table by the window, watching neighbors shuffle down the street, carrying casseroles and wrapped boxes. Their laughter echoed faintly, a reminder of the celebration I had been cut out of. But instead of the sharp sting that usually came, I felt steady, almost resolved. After breakfast, I grabbed my keys and drove to Oak Park. I had planned it carefully, knowing Emily and Daniel would be with my parents. Their social media posts confirmed it, photos of them in Springfield with plates piled high and smiles wide. That meant the apartment would be empty. When I opened the door with my spare key, the sight inside made my stomach clench. Dirty dishes stacked in the sink, clothes tossed across furniture, half-empty cups left on the floor. The carpet was stained, the walls scuffed. My once carefully maintained apartment looked like it had been neglected for months. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I started with the bedroom, pulling their clothes from drawers and closet, folding some, tossing others into boxes. Daniel's work boots, Emily's scattered makeup, a pile of unopened bills shoved under the bed. I packed them all methodically, one box after another. The living room took longer. Their electronics, books, and random gadgets were tangled together, cords twisted in knots. I labeled each box so I could tell them later where to find everything. By the time I moved into the kitchen, my back ached, but I kept going, sweeping dishes, pans, and groceries into bins. It was almost 2 hours before the last suitcase was zipped shut. I called the storage facility I had looked up earlier that week. The man on the phone told me he could meet me within the hour. I hauled the first load to my car, the cold air stinging my cheeks as I carried boxes across the parking lot. 3 trips later, the apartment was stripped bare. The storage unit was packed with their belongings, and I had locked it with a fresh padlock. I wrote down the address and unit number on a slip of paper, tucking it into my wallet for later. When I returned to the building, a locksmith was waiting just as arranged. He was bundled in a heavy coat, his toolbox clanking as he climbed the stairs. I let him in, and within 40 minutes, the locks were changed. He handed me 2 shiny new keys and wished me a Merry Christmas before heading back into the snow. I closed the door behind him and stood in the empty apartment. The silence was almost startling. No piles of laundry, no blaring television, no clutter choking the rooms, just quiet, clean space again. For the first time in years, the apartment felt like mine. I took a slow walk through each room, breathing deeply, letting the sense of control settle over me. This had been a long time coming. I locked up, pocketed the keys, and drove home. That evening, I treated myself to dinner from my favorite Italian restaurant. The delivery driver handed me a bag filled with pasta, salad, and warm breadsticks. I opened a bottle of champagne I had been saving, poured a glass, and sat at my table alone. Yet, it didn't feel lonely. It felt deliberate, almost celebratory. Music played softly in the background as I twirled pasta onto my fork. I thought of Emily and Daniel sitting smugly at my parents' table, laughing and clinking glasses, completely unaware that their safety net had been cut. The image didn't make me bitter. It made me calm. After dinner, I curled on the couch, the lights of the Christmas tree glowing softly in the corner. I called a few friends to wish them a Merry Christmas, then settled into an old movie. For once, I wasn't bracing myself for snide remarks or pretending not to notice the favoritism. I wasn't holding my tongue to keep the peace. The snow kept falling outside, blanketing the streets, muffling the city's noise. When I finally turned off the lights and went to bed, I felt lighter than I had in years. The next morning, just as I was finishing my coffee, my phone lit up. Emily's name flashed first, then Daniel's, then Mom's, then Dad's. Call after call, one after another, buzzing relentlessly on the table. I didn't need to answer to know exactly what they had discovered. I smiled, set the phone to silent, and let it buzz against the wood while I folded laundry. For once, the crisis wasn't mine to fix. By the time I had folded the last stack of towels, the phone had finally gone quiet. The silence was almost louder than the buzzing had been, a heavy pause in the air, as if everyone on the other end was regrouping and deciding what to do next. I carried the laundry to the bedroom, placed it neatly in drawers, and told myself I wasn't going to think about it anymore. But of course I did. It wasn't long before proof of their unraveling found its way to me. Around 3 that afternoon, my cousin Carol sent a text. She had gone over to my parents' house for Christmas dinner, and her message was blunt. Your dad's card was declined at the grocery store. Everyone saw. It was tense. Emily told everyone you froze everything. People are whispering. I sank onto the edge of my bed, staring at the screen. In my mind, I could see the scene as if I had been there. Dad trying to pay for extra groceries, swiping once, twice, then the red light and the cashier's polite but firm voice. Mom clutching her purse, cheeks flushed, whispering frantically. Emily raising her voice, declaring that I was the one to blame. And all of it happening in front of relatives who thrived on gossip. Carol sent another text. Emily says you kicked her and Daniel out too. She's crying to everyone about how cruel you are. A humorless laugh slipped out of me. Cruel, that was the word they had chosen this time. I stared at the tree lights in the corner of my room, watching them blur. For years, I had been the one to write checks quietly, to cover bills without questions, to smooth over their mistakes before anyone noticed. And now, the moment I stopped, I was painted as the villain. I carried the phone back to the kitchen and set it on the counter, deliberately walking away from it. I wasn't going to let their panic dictate my Christmas. I made myself a cup of tea, sat down by the window, and forced my eyes to the snow falling outside. But even as I sipped slowly, I couldn't shake the image of the dinner table in Springfield. Whispers bouncing from one relative to another, my name on every tongue. By 5 o'clock, the buzzing began again. First Emily, then Mom, then Dad, one after the other, their names flashing across the screen. I let them ring out, the phone vibrating against the wood until it went dark again. Then the voicemails came. I played the first, Emily's voice high and sharp. You've ruined Christmas. You think you're better than everyone, but you're pathetic. You can't just throw people out and cut us off. The second was Mom, her tone strained, teetering between pleading and angry. Rachel, we didn't mean to hurt you. We were just giving Emily time to cool down. Please, undo whatever you did at the bank. We can work out the apartment later. Dad's message was next, low and seething. You've embarrassed this family. Do you have any idea what you put us through today? We had to walk out of that store humiliated. This is not finished. The last was Daniel. His voice subdued. Rachel, we don't have money for rent. We don't know what to do. Please call me back. I listened to each one in order, my thumb hovering over the delete button, then pressed it without hesitation. One by one, I erased them until the inbox was empty. Later that night, another message came, this time from my Aunt Carol again. She had no reason to lie to me. She said, people were murmuring about how unfair it was for me to shoulder so much for years, only to be attacked when I stopped. She said, Uncle Jim shook his head and muttered that maybe Emily needed to grow up. For the first time, I realized some relatives were finally seeing the truth. I went to bed early, sliding under the covers while the phone still pulsed on the nightstand with missed calls. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep. The next morning, I brewed coffee and found more than 40 missed calls waiting for me. Messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, even an old neighbor asking what had happened. Clearly, Emily had been busy spinning her story. I imagined her in the living room, voice trembling just enough to win sympathy, blaming me for every hardship. But I had something she didn't: facts. Rent-free living for 4 years, more than $100,000 in lost income, a fully funded wedding, a vacation for the whole family, medical bills, car repairs, endless favors. I had receipts. If anyone cared to know the truth, it was easy to prove. I spent most of that day in quiet routines. I cooked soup, folded laundry again, and opened my laptop to review notes for the Markham contract. But my concentration wavered. I found myself staring at the same spreadsheet for 10 minutes, lost in thought. Each time the phone buzzed, my chest tightened, but I didn't answer. By evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and curled up on the couch. Outside, the city glowed with Christmas lights under a blanket of snow. Inside, my home was warm, peaceful, untouched by their chaos. I thought of Emily holding court in Springfield, declaring that I was toxic, cruel, selfish. I thought of Dad grumbling about embarrassment, Mom wringing her hands. And I thought of Daniel, quiet, probably realizing at last that free rides don't last forever. When my phone lit up again, I let it ring. Emily's voicemail came through minutes later, her voice cracking between fury and desperation. You don't know what you've done. You've ruined us. I deleted it without replaying. Silence filled the condo once more. I leaned back into the cushions, the tree lights reflecting in my glass of wine, and breathed deeply. Whatever storm was raging in Springfield, it no longer belonged to me. And though I knew it was only a matter of time before they came pounding on my door, I felt ready. 2 days later, just after noon, the doorbell rang so hard it echoed through the walls. I had been sitting at my dining table reviewing figures for the Markham account when the sound jolted me upright. My stomach tightened, but I knew exactly who it was. When I opened the blinds, I saw all 4 of them on the porch. Mom clutched her purse like a lifeline. Dad stood with his arms crossed. Emily looked ready to explode, and Daniel hung back with his hands shoved into his coat pockets. The sight made me pause, but I unlocked the door and opened it. They pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. Emily stormed into the living room, her face red, her voice rising instantly. What the hell did you do? The locks are changed. You can't just throw us out like that. I closed the door calmly behind them. Actually, I can. It's my apartment. Dad turned, his eyes hard. Rachel, this has gone far enough. We had to spend Christmas humiliated. And now you leave your own sister on the street. I crossed my arms, standing steady in my own living room. She's not on the street. Their belongings are safe in a storage unit, and I paid for the first month. After that, it's their problem. Emily's jaw dropped. Strangers live in storage units. You're insane. No, Emily, I said evenly. Strangers are people you cut out of your life because they won't hand you money. That's what you made me. Mom stepped forward, her eyes shiny with tears. Honey, I think this is just a misunderstanding. We didn't mean to hurt you. We were just trying to give Emily some space. I stared at her in disbelief. A misunderstanding? You told me I wasn't invited to Christmas. You told me I'd learn what family meant when I spent it alone. That doesn't sound like a misunderstanding. Emily's voice cracked as she jabbed her finger toward me. You're supposed to support your family. You let us live there for years, and now you want to act like it means nothing. I took a step closer, my voice low but sharp. For years, Emily. That's over $105,000 in rent I gave up. At the wedding I paid for, the trip to Hawaii, Mom's dental surgery, Dad's truck repairs. I've been supporting this family every way I could. And you thanked me by locking me out of Christmas dinner and calling me toxic. Daniel finally spoke, his tone quieter than the others. Rachel, we can't find a place overnight. We don't have savings. We're stuck. Can't we work something out? I turned to him. You should have thought about that before you decided to back Emily in cutting me off. You don't get to play victim now. Mom's voice trembled. We didn't realize you were keeping track of everything. I shook my head. I wasn't keeping score. I was helping because I thought that's what family did. But apparently, none of that matters because I wouldn't throw another $120,000 into Emily's fantasy business. Emily exploded again, her face blotchy. It's not a fantasy. You don't know everything. I almost laughed. You've never run a business in your life. You can't hold a job for more than 2 years. You have no plan, no research, no projections. You wanted me to hand you money on faith while you sat in my apartment rent-free. That's not ambition. That's entitlement. Dad's jaw tightened as he stepped forward. Rachel, you've made your point. But this cruelty, this punishment, it's beneath you. My pulse raced, but my voice stayed steady. What's beneath me is being used until there's nothing left. I told you all no once, and instead of respecting it, you cut me out. So, I respected your choice and made my own. The room went still. Mom's tears slid down her cheeks. Daniel stared at the floor. Emily's chest heaved, but her words had run dry. I took a breath and picked up a slip of paper from the coffee table. I held it out to Daniel. Here's the address and unit number. Everything you own is there. After the month I paid for, it's on you. He took it silently, his hand trembling. Dad's voice lowered, almost a growl. You're going to regret this. I met his stare. No. For the first time in my life, I won't. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, with everything unspoken. I walked to the door, opened it wide, and stood waiting. They didn't move at first, just exchanged glances as if hoping I would break and beg them to stay. But I didn't. Finally, Dad took Mom's arm and guided her out. Daniel followed slowly, the paper still in his hand. Emily stopped in front of me, her eyes blazing. I hate you, she whispered. Good, I said evenly. That makes 2 of us. She stormed past me, slamming her shoulder against the door frame. I closed the door behind them, locked it, and leaned against the wood, my chest rising and falling with the weight of it all. The silence that followed was deafening. But for the first time in years, it felt like freedom. I slept harder that night than I had in months. But by morning, the weight of what happened pressed back in. My phone lit up with more messages, not just from Emily and my parents, but from numbers I didn't recognize. Word had spread fast, and now relatives who rarely spoke to me were chiming in, offering their judgments and thinly veiled scolding. I deleted everyone without listening. At work the following day, I tried to bury myself in spreadsheets, but my concentration slipped. Monica stopped by my desk and noticed the tightness in my shoulders. You look like you're carrying bricks on your back, she said softly. I managed a small smile. They showed up at my condo yesterday, all of them. And I told them the truth. I listed everything I've done, everything I've paid for, and I gave them the storage unit address. Then I told them to leave. Monica leaned closer, her voice calm but steady. That took guts. You finally chose yourself. I nodded, though my stomach churned. Part of me expected to feel relief, but another part kept replaying Emily's voice, her words dripping with hate. That evening, back at my condo, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. Snowflakes drifted under the streetlights, and I watched them fall, thinking about how quickly the roles had flipped. For years, I had been the dependable one, the fixer, the daughter who always had a solution. Now, I was the villain in their story. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail from Dad. His voice was low and stern. You've gone too far, Rachel. You've disgraced this family. You will regret this. I pressed delete, my hands steady. Not long after, Mom called. I didn't pick up, but her voicemail cracked with emotion. Please, Rachel, we made a mistake. Emily is beside herself and Daniel doesn't know what to do. We never wanted it to come to this. Just talk to us. Her words made my throat tighten, but I shook my head. Where was this tone when they told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas? Where was it when they labeled me toxic for not handing over my savings? I closed my eyes and leaned back, the glass cool in my hand. The truth was simple. Their desperation wasn't about love or reconciliation. It was about money, about losing the lifeline they had taken for granted. Over the next few days, the storm kept swirling. Mutual friends sent me screenshots of Emily's posts online. She painted me as cruel, heartless, obsessed with control. In one post, she even claimed I had locked her out without warning, omitting the 4 years of rent-free living and every dollar I had spent. Comments poured in, some sympathetic, others sharp. I scrolled through them once, then set my phone down for good. I decided to meet Claire for lunch that week. We sat in a quiet booth at a downtown cafe, the clatter of dishes muffled around us. She studied me carefully. You look calmer than I expected. I shrugged. Maybe because there's nothing left to argue about. I did what I had to do. Claire folded her hands on the table. and they will have to face the consequences. Sometimes justice doesn't come with applause. It comes with silence. Her words settled over me like a blanket. I sipped my coffee and realized she was right. That night back home, I turned off my phone completely and let the condo sink into stillness. I cooked dinner, lit a candle, and read a book until the words blurred. Outside, the city kept moving. But in my little corner, the chaos was gone. Still, in the quiet moments, doubt slipped in. I thought of Dad's glare, of Emily's voice breaking when she realized the locks had changed. I wondered if maybe I had been too harsh. But then I pictured all the times I had bailed them out. All the nights I had stayed up worrying about their bills. All the times I had bitten my tongue while they dismissed my life as easy. And the doubt faded. Family doesn't cut you out of Christmas over money. Family doesn't call you toxic for protecting your future. Family doesn't treat your generosity like an endless debt. I whispered the words into the dark, reminding myself of their truth. When sleep finally came, it was light and restless. But I woke the next morning with a strange steadiness. The storm was still out there, circling through voicemails, posts, and gossip. But inside my walls, it no longer belonged to me. The first Monday after Christmas, I woke to an apartment that felt different. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, almost protective, as though the walls themselves were shielding me from the noise outside. I made coffee and sat at the table, watching steam curl above the mug, thinking about how much had shifted in such a short time. For years, my life had revolved around the pull of family obligations. Their needs always louder than mine. Now, for the first time, the center of gravity was back where it belonged. The days that followed were a blur of cold winds and gray skies. I went into the office, poured myself into the Markham contract, and found my focus sharper than it had been in months. Without the constant interruptions from Emily or Mom, I stayed late at my desk reviewing numbers until the streets below glowed with headlights. Monica noticed, too. One evening, as she packed up, she paused at my cubicle. "You look steadier," she said. "Like you finally set something down." I smiled at her, realizing she was right. At night, I returned to my condo, still decorated with twinkling lights that cast a warm glow across the rooms. I left the tree up longer than usual. It wasn't about tradition anymore, but about reclaiming something for myself. Each time I switched it on, it reminded me that I could build a holiday that didn't depend on being accepted at someone else's table. Through mutual relatives, bits of news trickled in. Emily and Daniel had moved into a small one-bedroom on the west side. It was nothing like my apartment in Oak Park, and they struggled to cover the rent. Mom and Dad had kept quiet around most of the family, but I heard from Aunt Carol that some cousins had started to ask questions. Why had I been the one to fund so much for so long? Why was Emily always needing a bailout? For once, the whispers weren't against me. They were shifting. In January, I signed a new lease agreement with Ethan and Julia Baker, the young couple who had taken over my Oak Park place. Both teachers, they paid on time and sent polite notes if anything needed attention. When I stopped by to drop off a replacement key, Julia offered me a plate of cookies she had baked. The apartment was spotless, cozy, full of life. Walking through those rooms felt like breathing again. No clutter, no tension, no weight of expectation pressing into the walls. Back in the city, I felt myself changing too. The heaviness in my chest eased. I woke up earlier, went for walks even in the icy winds, started cooking meals just for me instead of rushing takeout between obligations. Some nights I curled on the couch with a book. The quiet around me not lonely anymore, but safe. The calls from my family eventually slowed. By February, they had nearly stopped. A few desperate messages from Emily slipped through. She alternated between fury and sorrow. One night she raged about how heartless I had been. The next she begged me to reconsider, to help them just this once. I didn't respond to any of them. I had learned that no reply was stronger than 1,000 explanations. Work thrived. With the Markham contract finalized, Mr. Thompson called me into his office. He rarely handed out praise, but that day he leaned back in his chair and told me I had done outstanding work. He said my precision had saved the company a major account. I walked out of his office feeling taller, steadier. For once, my achievements weren't overshadowed by family chaos. Still, late at night, doubts sometimes stirred. I thought about Emily's face the day she realized the locks had changed. I heard Dad's words calling me cruel, Mom's voice cracking in voicemail. Part of me wondered if I'd been too harsh, but then I reminded myself of the 4 years of free rent, the wedding, the vacations, the medical bills, the endless favors. I remembered the sting of being told I wasn't welcome at Christmas, as if I were disposable. Each time the doubt rose, those memories answered it. Family is supposed to mean unconditional love, but I had learned the hardest truth. Real love doesn't disappear when money is withheld. Real respect doesn't vanish when boundaries are drawn. I had not cut them off because I didn't care. I had stepped back because I finally did. In March, Monica and I met for brunch near Lincoln Park. The sun was brighter that day, the snow melting into patches of grass. As we sipped coffee, she studied me with a knowing smile. "You look lighter," she said. "Like you've been carrying a weight for years and finally set it down." I laughed softly. Maybe I did. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That isn't selfish, Rachel. That's survival." Her words sank deep, and I carried them home with me. That night, I sat by the window with a glass of wine, the city glowing beneath a star-strewn sky. I thought about the months behind me, the battles, the silence, the endings I never imagined. I thought about the peace that had taken their place. For the first time in years, I felt whole. I wasn't waiting for the next demand, the next guilt trip, the next storm. My life was finally mine. If you were sitting across from me right now, I'd ask you this. If your own family pushed you out for refusing to give them everything, what would you do? Would you keep giving, or would you finally draw the line?